people to come here, and 2 is for people to learn.
You're saying it's karma. Shake your head and it grows back.
It's snowing! Welcome to Go on Shot TV. I'm Doug Roxburgh, and I reference the weather because the Arctic Winter Games just took place in Greenland, and we're speaking with Councillor Phil Meagher, who is a representation of Team Alberta North, and he'll speak about the differences from the 2004 Winter Games right here in Buffalo to these games in Greenland, because he did spend 9 days in that cold, cold climate. Also on this episode of Go, we have some exotic animals over at McDonald Island Park, socks that just aren't for looks, and it's not a massacre, but a hair massacre to help kids in need. With Phil Meagher inside, the councillor here in Fort McMurray, and we say inside because we're trying to warm Phil up after being in Greenland for about 9 days at the Arctic Winter Games representing Team Alberta North. And Phil, we're just curious as to how your experience was there.
Well, you're right about being inside. Last week I spent most of the week outside or in a sea can waxing skis. So the experience was just out of this world. It was a different culture than what I'm used to. But my biggest surprise was the fact that there were absolutely no trees. It was just a barren landscape of rock, and the wind was absolutely unbelievable. I've never skied in conditions like that before.
What conditions are we talking about?
We're talking about wind speed at 20, and they measure it per second, and it's 25 meters per second, which is fast. So if you threw Tim Hortons cup up in the air in 25 seconds, it would move a meter, or in a second it would move 25 meters. Absolutely incredible.
So the wind could essentially stop you while you're skiing?
If you were skiing with it, it was great, but once you turned around, the wind would literally stop you. As a matter of fact, it would push you backwards sometimes.
Wow, and the culture in Greenland, obviously a lot different than here in Canada. Anything you took from their culture compared to ours?
It certainly did. It's Greenlandic, and I was hurrying around downtown, getting the kids back on the bus, and an elder downtown, he said, "What's your hurry?" And I said, "Well, I got to get these kids in the bus. We got to get back to her." He says, "The only people who hurry around here are the hunters and the hunted." I took something from that, so I slowed down a little bit, still got the kids back on time, but it was a very relaxed pace of life. Yeah.
And at least you weren't the hunted in Greenland.
No, I was hunting for the kids. Yeah, that's right.
And speaking of the kids, we'll talk about how they did a little later on in our episode, because they did pretty well according to all the news reports and from what Phil told me off camera a little earlier on. But also what's different in Greenland is the animal life. They certainly do not have kangaroos. They certainly do not have snakes. Nope. And they certainly do not have those exotic animals. Fort McMurray doesn't either, except when they come to McDonald Island. We speak of isolation in Fort McMurray, but it's not as isolated as a town of about 17,000 in Greenland, where Phil Meagher was one of the representatives for Team Alberta North at the Arctic Winter Games. And the kids did pretty well, didn't they, Phil?
Oh, under the conditions, I think our kids skied well. They played hockey well, futsal, volleyball, all the sports. They were, the ones that I could take in because we were so busy with cross-country skiing. But what I heard is they played well, and some of them played above their heads and did well. And of course, we brought back a ton of medals.
How many medals did we bring back?
I think it was 22 from Fort McMurray here alone. So 22, and they call them ulus.
Oh, they don't call them medals, they call them ulus.
They call them ulus, and if people don't know what the ulu is, it's a sharpening tool or a scraping tool for the hides of skins in the north.
Interesting. But you were in charge of the ski team. How did the cross-country ski team do?
Surprisingly well, especially knowing we're racing against Norway and Russia and Alaska. They have a strong team. And Yukon, surprisingly strong out of Whitehorse. They have a very strong club there. So to win a silver and a bronze in the women's relay and the men's relay was an incredible feat for our kids. We had one who came fifth, and they did well because I've never skied in those conditions. And I'll tell you, those kids, it was when the wind came up, they showed their toughness.
So we can say the influence of Olympian Graham Killick is alive and strong in Alberta North.
Well, yeah, they know Graham. Graham's helped us out with a lot of training we've done, and even the kids from Grand Prairie have benefited a bit from that. And I think that people like Claire Richter, who's known throughout the north for her coaching of cross-country skiing, and history with the games has been just so valuable to the sport. But like I said, the conditions were altogether different than what the conditions we're used to skiing here.
Well, welcome back to home soil, Phil. We welcome you back to Fort McMurray. What's one thing you were looking forward to the most when you got back here?
Other than my dog, it was the trees. Yeah, and I love skiing in the trees and just getting out of that wind. It was that was a real big thing. And getting out of the sea can where we waxed all week and spent up to 8 hours a day waxing skis because of the temperature changes and things that happen.
Well, Phil, thank you again. When you go skiing, make sure you put on warm socks, because socks aren't just used to keep warmth. They're also used for medication reasons, as we find out in Red Deer. When we speak of barren landscapes in Fort McMurray, we don't realize it because we have this great boreal forest, but in Greenland, there's absolutely nothing, and the wind is very, very punishable, as we heard earlier from Phil Marr. Of course, the Arctic Winter Games will take place again, and maybe they'll take place again right here in Wood Buffalo. I'm Doug Roxburgh, and we'll see you when we see you.